Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Commit Podcast. Today I have with me Logan Kilpatrick, who is a DevRel at OpenAI. Today we are going to discuss a lot of interesting things about AI, such as the future of AI, AGI, GPT-5, and more. Let's get started. Hey Logan, thanks so much for joining the Commit Podcast.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So I would like to start by addressing the most commonly asked question that people often ask and like to discuss. What are your thoughts on the idea that AI could replace all developers at some point, right? So personally, I think AI is a great enabler and a great productivity booster. But as somebody who is working with a really smart bunch of folks and looking at the technology really closely, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think AI will replace developers in next, let's say, 5, 10, or 20 years?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's very hard in the present moment to like reliably predict the future in 10 to 20 years. I think I can speak confidently for the next 5 years. I think the next 5 years, developers aren't going anywhere. I think the role of developers is so critical, and there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot more than just like writing code that's involved in that process. And also, in some sense, like great products are built by developers and product managers and engineers in general who have like taste. And I think that AI maybe in the future will have taste, but I think like you're paying. I buy products from people who I agree with the decisions that they make, and I think like who knows whether or not AI will be able to get to that point. I do think like long out into the future, it's indeed seemingly possible that you could use AI to replace or augment or something like that a vast majority of the workload that developers do. I still don't think that that will mean that. I think there's this notion that just because the technology is capable of doing something that an engineer is able to do, that means that engineers won't be needed. I really still think that even if I had an engineer that was more capable than me, that could sit next to me and do work on my behalf, I would be working with that engineer. Like I wouldn't be out of the picture because like I want to make things. And I think that that's the like core piece of the future is that people want to build things, especially software engineers want to build things. And I don't think that having super powerful AI is going to change that.
Nice. I also think the same, that I think the most probable outcome could be that most of the boring and mundane jobs could be automated and engineers will be freed up to solve bigger problems.
I agree with that, and I actually think that that's like happening right now today. Like I feel like as an engineer, I'm able to tackle like when I'm thinking in my head of all the side projects that I don't have time to do. Like I feel like I can tackle roughly like 10x more ambitious projects because I have access to AI. And I think like that curve is going to continue on the same path. And I'm guessing like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, like I'm going to be able to like, go and build an entire SaaS startup that normally would have taken like me raising venture capital and hiring 15 developers or something like that with just me and my AI copilot. And I think that's a future that is actually really exciting because there's so many things that need to be built in the world. And the real limitation on a lot of the innovation that needs to happen is like just having enough humans who know how to write code.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And things are definitely moving really, really fast at OpenAI. And you guys are shipping so many awesome things so fast, right? So and feel free to skip this question, but do you think OpenAI is working on GPT-5, and is this going to be out anytime soon? And if it's going to be out at some point, do you think it will possess super intelligence capabilities?
It's a good question. So I think Sam, our CEO, has had some official lines on this. I think I don't know off the top of my head whether or not like GPT-5 in whatever form it'll end up being released in is like actually being trained or not. So I won't comment on that specifically, but I will say like we're always trying to train new models. We're always like, at the end of the day, like the core roadmap for OpenAI is to build artificial general intelligence. So whether or not the model is being trained, folks are working on like the research to figure out like how do we make it so that we can make those models really successful. So that work is continuous. My guess, just because of like the leaps in the capabilities, like I wouldn't classify whatever GPT-5 ends up being as super intelligence. Obviously, I have no idea what we end up releasing, so not really sure. But just like following the trajectory of where we went from GPT-3 to 3.5 to 4, now with 4 Turbo, like I don't think that 5 is going to be the thing that like changes the landscape of the universe. I think it'll be like incredibly impressive and much more useful in a lot of ways, I'm guessing, but I don't think that it's going to be like the quote unquote super intelligence is at least my bet today, but I don't know because it doesn't exist and I haven't seen it. So
Cool, perfect. I think that's fair enough. But as an outsider, when I look at OpenAI, I think you move really really fast, right? And in the last DevDay, lots of changes, lots of features were announced. So I'm just curious, how does the how do you really build the roadmap, and whether OpenAI plans to do Dev Day every year, and whether that has any impact on the actual roadmap that you create and work on?
yeah, that's a good question. I agree that the team moves really fast, and I think a lot of it has to do with one, just like hiring a bunch of incredible people, also people who have really high agency. Like I feel like if you are someone who has high agency and you want to just like go and do a bunch of meaningful work, like OpenAI is an incredible place because there's so much work that needs to happen. And I feel like um, I I feel lucky enough to be here and that I can just like go in and look around and see a bunch of problems that I think need to be solved and go and solve them. And I think that ends up meaning that we get to ship a lot of cool stuff and solve a lot of people's real problems. Um, I do think the intent is to have a dev day every year. I think people really liked dev day. I think there was a bunch of learnings around, developers want to know when to expect changes, and I think especially as more and more people are building using our products, it doesn't. It's not always the best outcome for developers for us to just be like, surprise, we're releasing all this new stuff, and you kind of have to scramble to like adopted and all this stuff. And as a developer who's building this ecosystem, I think a good example of this is like in the iOS ecosystem and Mac OS, et cetera, you kind of know from like a company perspective and from an individual developer perspective, like what to expect every year because Apple has these sort of scheduled release cycles. And, there'll be the event in September, whatever it is for the new iPhone. There'll be WWDC at the beginning of the summer. So you can sort of plan your roadmap and things like that around those release cycles. And my guess is we move more towards that sort of model where developers just have a little bit of heads up that this stuff is coming.
That's nice. That's nice. I really like this. And since you're talking about the OpenAI team, and I am personally a big fan of how you manage the whole DevRel at OpenAI, right? And I see you constantly engaging with folks on Twitter, and so that makes me think: what does a typical day for you look like at OpenAI? What are the things that you work on, and what excites you the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. What excites me the most is like seeing problems people have and trying my absolute hardest to make the changes happen that developers want to see. Like I think there's a whole slew of different things that like are out of my control and are um artifacts of this very complicated system that we built that like I actually don't have a ton of influence to make changes. And there's also a ton of things that like I think if I really push for, we can actually make some meaningful change for a developer who's having some problems. So that gives me the most excitement is when I see someone post on our developer forum, for example, says I'm having X, Y, and Z problem. I can go in, identify, validate the problem, and then we could go and do something about it and actually improve the experience for that developer or a whole subset of developers. I spend most of my time sort of on one of three things. One of the big things is around just like hearing from developers, seeing the problems people are having, understanding where the friction is in our product, and then working with our API experience team, working with some of the other folks internally to make the product better. I spend a little bit of time working on making the models better. How do we take feedback from developers, specifically API developers, and sort of get that feedback into the model to make the model actually better for their use cases. And then I think the last basket is like all of this miscellaneous stuff, and that's like the communication stuff. Like I think OpenAI, um, as we've grown, have sort of needed to put more time into communicating with developers. I think like historically we could sort of get away with like very lightweight communication because it was small and people were just kind of excited and building with this stuff. And now I think like people have really built their businesses and made a big bet on OpenAI, and I think we owe it to them to like be in more constant communication about what we're building, the state of our platform, et cetera, et cetera. So spend a bunch of my time doing like that sort of communication work as well. And then all this other stuff around hackathons, developer education, and a whole basket of other random stuff that's come up. And to be honest, like the thing for me that is fun is I really like I really like the breadth, and I hope I don't end up getting stuck doing just one of these things, because it's like it's a ton of fun and it's really useful perspective to understand what I'm doing, one of these other things, like how all this other stuff is related back to that. So fingers crossed I'll be able to do that.
That's nice. That's nice. And I also see that you sponsor hackathons in San Francisco. I mean, in San Francisco, a lot of things happen. But I think one of the things that happens frequently is that OpenAI sponsors some of the hackathons. How does it happen? Do people just DM you and you just decide on the fly?
Yeah, it used to. We now actually have a like a public process that's on the developer platform website. It's like hackathon. I forgot what the exact URL is, but if you just Google like OpenAI hackathon support, I think it might show up. Um, and yeah, you just fill in the details, put in what you're looking for the event, and then me and there's a team of folks who help review some of those proposals, go in and look and make sure everything looks good. But in general, we really want to support hackathons. The reason we hadn't done more of it historically is like it actually ended up just being like a lot of human work to like the make it happen, because like people would have to submit emails, have to like run these scripts to like validate, and there'd be a bunch of back and forth because at the last minute the organizers would always be like, oh, here's 600 new emails, yada yada yada. So we have a team of folks who help me do that today, and it's made it much more scalable. And yeah, so if folks have hackathons, please get in touch. We'd love to support. We want to enable people who are building in this ecosystem. I think it's really important.
Perfect. That's good. That's fair enough. I mean, we run hackathons at Hashnode, and I know that I know it can be quite draining at times, especially if you're thinking about all the logistics around shipping swag kits, giving gift cards, and the whole process of managing the winners. I think it does take uh, uh, quite quite a bit of energy out of you.
Yeah, we've taken a very light-handed approach historically, just because like there's so much excitement in the ecosystem that like a lot of the heavy lifting the individual organizers are doing themselves. And like we haven't done a ton of like first party organized hackathons, again because it's like a bunch of work that the team hasn't had bandwidth to do. I think like 2024 we might see more of those. I think hopefully like I'll try to convince some folks that around DevDay we should do a hackathon. I think that'd be a ton of fun, so that people can build with all the cool new stuff that comes out. But yeah, I think it's been nice that there's been so much excitement, so that we haven't had to take on the burden of like putting together all these events. And there's still like, I would say if you're an SF at least, like there's still a plethora of options. Like you could go to a hackathon every weekend if you really wanted to. There's so many options in San Francisco.
Of course, just for our listeners, do you primarily sponsor hackathons that happen offline, or are you open to sponsoring both online and offline hackathons?
We do both. So I think, and I'm slightly biased in this sense. Like I think there's a ton of value in in-person hackathons. I also think like you really only get a very small subsection of who is interested in this technology if you focus on in person. So we've done a ton of virtual hackathons as well. So it could be either of them.
Sure, sounds good. And do you still think San Francisco is still the best place to be if you are starting a new AI company?
If you're starting a new AI company, it would be hard to imagine that there's a better place. Every time I'm in San Francisco, I'm getting the chance to meet with the 65 people that I'm regularly engaging with online and on Twitter. So it really does feel like there are second order benefits to being in San Francisco. So if you can be in San Francisco, I would be in San Francisco. I don't think that you have to be like I'm for if anyone is looking visually, like I'm not in San Francisco, I'm in Chicago. I spend like a week a month in San Francisco. I used to live in San Francisco before I moved back to Chicago, but um, there is a lot of value in being around other people who are building the same problem, and I think that's like one piece of it. I think the other piece of it is, and I have this challenge anywhere that I live that's not San Francisco, is like I get a lot of personal benefit and value from being around people who are trying to solve really, really ambitious problems. And like to me, that's motivating. And like to me, I like the feeling of knowing that the person standing next to me or at some random conference or hackathon is like trying to solve like this massive problem in the world. And like that's
Yeah.
just cool. Like I get a lot of like I get jazzed about that. And it's not that that's not the case in Chicago and other cities around the world, but it just feels fundamentally different. Like I think there's this optimism that like we can solve the world's problems in San Francisco, and I think people in other places are just like on a different wavelength in some sense. And again, there's value in that too. Like I think for me, it's nice to go outside in Chicago and meet people who haven't heard of ChatGPT and who don't care about AI. And I think it's like a nice realization and perspective, like being so deep and spending every waking moment of my day doing AI stuff. It's nice to know that there's like people who this hasn't affected and who it hasn't touched. And I think it's important to know that those people exist, because if you were in San Francisco all the time, you would just assume that everybody's building an AI company and like cares about AI and uses ChatGPT every day and is a prompt engineering expert, which is very far from the truth.
I agree 100%. Uh, I mean, somebody told me that I mean, if you're in San Francisco, the next copy chat can change your life. No one knows, right?
Yeah,
And it's just 7 by 7, so it's very small area. So you tend to meet the same people again and again, and who can be really ambitious, and who can also drive you to go on and build big things, right? That you wouldn't otherwise build somewhere else.
I
So
love
you
it.
said, yeah. So for me, I mean, I try to spend 6 or 7 months a year in San Francisco, and then come back to India and build from here.
Traveling is hard. I think that's the downside. Like I'm excited for a world where we've solved the travel problem, because I'm like, my family is here, my partner's here in Chicago. It's difficult to sort of uproot your life and move somewhere else. And um, yeah, I'm hopeful that they make those like boom aerospace supersonic jets actually work, because I'm like I would love to just like 1 hour in the air, be in San Francisco, come back to Chicago. Like that would be incredible.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. And I mean, every time I travel to San Francisco from India, it's like it takes 16 hours, right? So I take one flight which flies from Bangalore to SF. It takes 16 hours, and by the time I reach in San Francisco, I'm already trained and jet lagged. So that would be amazing if somebody
Yeah,
can build this.
so much net productivity improvement for the world if companies can pull off supersonic travel, and then also they need to use that Starlink internet so that people can reliably work on planes. I think that will be incredible as well.
Cool. Fair enough. So yeah, moving on to our next segment, I'd like to ask you, what are your thoughts on open source AI models versus proprietary models? So we now see quite a bit of new open source models that emerge. I think we recently saw Mistral AI, then we have LLaMA, and they are getting better every day, if not at par with OpenAI, but they're still getting better. So, what are your thoughts on can open source AI models ever perform the same way that proprietary models perform?
I think anything is possible. I do think that the reality is the open source models First off, I haven't, just from like a purely business perspective, like I have yet to understand deeply some of the business models that folks are using around open source models. Like I think it's like right now in this moment in this environment, it seems like it could be economically viable to build some of these models, and like venture capital firms and stuff like that are putting in money so that people can take a shot on goal because they understand that there's this huge opportunity to build AI models and make them accessible, and who knows what will happen. So I think today you can get a lot of money to do this. I think in 5 years, it's an open question in my mind of like, are there sustainable business models? I hope that there are because I actually think that there's a bunch of value in people building open source models. I spent a ton of time before I was working at OpenAI doing a bunch of open source stuff, doing open source communities, advising people on open source. So I think open source is super important and critical to the world of technology. Um, I just, yeah, I think it's from my perspective, it's more of a sustainability question. Like, are there actual models that will make it so that training these large models and putting them public in the open is like a sustainable business model? And I don't know the answer to that question. And companies like Mistral and others are going to have to figure that out for us. Um, I also don't think that, at least it's, and of course I'm biased because I believe deeply in the work that OpenAI is doing. I don't think that anyone has made a bet at the order of magnitude that OpenAI has um, on training these models. Like at the end of the day, like access to compute and data and human capital, like intellectual capital, is what is going to result in the best model. And I think that OpenAI has the advantage in all three of those categories. So until I see that someone else has, maybe there'll be some fundamental breakthroughs that will disrupt that cycle, and I don't know what those would be, but um, I have a lot of conviction that it's going to be hard to train a better model unless you have better human capital, access to data, and access to compute. And I think like we just have the best access to all three of those things today. Um, and it's interesting to see like, you know, you can have access to arguably in some capacity better compute or like more compute, more data, and more human capital and still not make a better model. And you can look at Google as an example of this. And I think a lot of that comes down to like the fundamental structures of an organization as well. Like
Yeah.
Google has a ton of pressure to, preserve their profit machine and all this other stuff, and also just like the challenges of bureaucracy once you have a large organization. And they
Yeah.
can want to ship a great model as much as they can, but they're sort of beholden to all these other structures that exist. And like at the end of the day, for OpenAI, the only thing that is important to us is building models, building them safely, and distributing them equitably to the world so that everybody benefits from this technology. Like we don't have this pressure to maximize ChatGPT plus subscriber revenue. And I think even in some sense, like we don't have pressures to like build the most popular developer platform. Like I think we are going to build an incredibly popular developer platform, and that's important to us, and we want to support developers. But like the mission is building AGI, and the mechanism in a lot of ways to distribute that is through the API platform and through ChatGPT. But it's important to like keep that goal alignment in perspective.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And one problem that I always think about with open source model is that if the model is open source, and if they start offering inferences, it can be. I mean, since the model is open source, somebody else can host the same model and they can undercut the pricing as well. That still remains a key challenge.
Yeah, and we've seen this already where like selling inference compute is a race to the bottom. It's I think
Yeah.
the 10x reductions in compute costs already for some of those new Mistral models. Like I don't think that the real economic value creation is going to come from inference compute. I think that's going to be ubiquitous access to cheap inference compute. Everybody's trying to do the same thing. Some people will maybe have great engineering teams that eke out an extra 10 or 20%, but I don't think that that's the real opportunity. I think the real opportunity is honestly like build incredibly compelling products on top of these models. And um, it just goes back to my original comment about like you just in that case have to have the best model or like a real defensible product experience, which I don't think that there's no direct correlation between building an open source model and having an incredible product experience. Like I think these are two very different things. And I think OpenAI was fortunate that we built a product that had real traction, and we also happen to be building great models as well. I don't think there's like a corollary between those two things. I think you can get lucky and have both, but I don't think that it's I don't think it's easy to do both, actually.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that. So this explains open source versus proprietary models. The other question that I constantly think about is the context size. So when we launched ChatGPT, we had, I think, 4,000 4K context size. Then it was uplifted to 8K. Then you also released GPT 32K context size, and recently I think we released 128K. Right. So is there work happening actively to increase the context size to the point that people might not need embeddings anymore? Is that something that OpenAI is actively focusing on?
Yeah, I think there's probably always ongoing research into this. I don't have any like specific information about who's doing that research or what it looks like today. I would imagine yes. I think it's like the fundamental question. Like one of the main limitations of large language models is the context window. So if you can sort of eliminate the need for that being a problem, I think it becomes like really, really useful. My perspective is that it's a very open research and engineering problem of how to get around the context window. You can do a bunch of sneaky stuff with embeddings and different techniques and stuff like that. But I think it's really like a deep research question. It's also like I think there's a lot of, and that's what I think is so cool about today's era is like there's a lot of open research questions, but there's also a lot of like deep engineering problems. Like I think there's a lot of stuff related to like the inference efficiency that changes when you get larger context windows. So I can imagine a world where like even if you can have an unlimited context window, there's like all this like crazy engineering work that's happening or like systems that are happening behind the scenes that are like optimizing the way that things pass through the context window because of the inference like the way that inference materializes itself, the properties of that. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm guessing like the models will continue to get larger from a context window side. Yeah.
Sure. And what about hallucinations? Do you think at some point the tech will be so good that it will eliminate hallucinations completely?
Hallucinations is an interesting point. I think like again, Andre Karpathy had a great post about this. Like I think the framing of hallucinations being a thing is actually in many ways like the wrong framing of the problem. Like the model is doing what it was trained to be done, which is predict the next most token based on the probability of data in the training set. So it's doing exactly what it was trained to be done. We as
Yeah.
humans are saying, "Oh, that's not what we would have expected it to do." But the reality is that's the information that the humans gave the model when it was trained. The problem is there will because of the nature of like large data sets, there will always be things which reasonable people can argue are not true. And then I'm talking about like more nuanced things. Whereas like I think there's a lot of like easy, low hanging fruit, like totally wrong things that the model does today that you could probably fix from a hallucination standpoint. I'm talking about like more nuanced things where um, yeah, you could ask a lot of like opinion based questions and then somebody says, oh, the model's hallucinating because I don't think that's true. But I think the real solution is likely to be more of an engineering one where the model just has like built-in systems that take the outputs and then verify them in some capacity. Like you go and kick off um, a bunch of browsers and they go and search the internet and try to get consensus. And you could even imagine a world where like there's some actual like human or other AI system in the loop where like, you have a bunch of human perspectives or personalities represented by other models, and then requests feed into those models, and those models say, yes, I actually think it should be, more this way or more that way. So there's a lot of like engineering ways to solve this problem so that you can just like feel more comfortable with the reliability of these systems. But I don't think I don't think hallucinations are fundamentally the problem. I think it's more of there's a more of a human aspect to this than like the core technology I think presents itself with.
Sure, sure. The reason I asked this question is because I was recently chatting with a person who is building a healthcare company. So their main problem was that sometimes the AI will not talk factually correct data, right? So that is when I started thinking that if the I mean I- for an app like for an app that deals with healthcare, the consistency and factual correctness plays a key role, right? So I've been constantly thinking whether at some point there will be a case where AI always generates factually correct info.
Yeah, I don't think that it'll be possible. The next token prediction model of transformers is not what is going to result in us just because of the inherent nature of how that technology works. You're going to need like secondary systems that go in and use a bunch of like more deterministic or heuristic based approaches to validate the outputs of these models. Like I don't think that you could have the most incredible model in the world and um, it doesn't feel intuitively to me, and I could be wrong because I'm perhaps not super close to like our research efforts around this. I suppose that it's possible, and I just don't have an understanding of how it would actually happen. But it seems like to me, at least, like there will be other parts of the stack that solve this problem, not at like the next token prediction model piece of it is at least my instinct today. But we'll have to see as we push more. I think like the nice part is like there's a lot of things that we can do to improve hallucinations in the model. And we saw that with GPT-4, like it ended up being like 40% more factual than 3.5. And um, yeah, I actually think that trend will continue. It's just like at what point, and like for the medical use cases, this is a great example where you need like so many nines of reliability that
Yeah,
it will be it'll be difficult for the model to get to that point, and that's where I think like in the immediate and medium term, like people should build systems, verification systems around these models so that people can use these applications around the medical space.
sure. So a third party service or API that does fact checking that could help in this case.
Could help. I think it's more nuanced than fact checking. Like I think in the medical space, like not, the problem is not that it's like making up really basic things that you'd be able to fact check. It's like you really need to like build a system that deeply understands. Like if you're a pathologist and you're trying to use this to help you better understand pathology, like you need a system that deeply understands pathology, and like a basic fact checking type of API wouldn't be the solution. You need some really domain specific application that like understands the nuance of pathology.
Sure, sure. I do hope the tech continues to mature and get much better. And yeah, this is exciting,
I agree.
right? Do you also think the price will also continue to fall because as the tech matures, we already see the price of GPT coming down with each iteration. Do you think that trend will continue to have?
Yeah, I think broadly from a technology like ecosystem trend, I think this tends to be the case. Like you have new technology, it's expensive. Over time, people figure out ways to make it more efficient, and you get better economies of scale, and the prices drop. So I think that's a general trend. I think it happens that that's also happening with us in the AI space right now. My instinct is that will likely continue. I think for us from a strategic point of view, like we want the most people possible to use this technology to build really meaningful, important stuff. So I think we hope that we are able to continue to do that. I think there's a lot of engineering and research work that needs to happen so that we can actually enable that, so that we can make price of inference cheaper and all that good stuff. But I think that's something that's top of mind. Like the for every order of magnitude that we drop prices, it's like enables all of these new use cases that either people hadn't tried to solve because it was too expensive, or you just now enable people who have startups or people who are building projects to go and build the things that they were doing and just like have a much better profit margin or better better economic sort of perspective on their business. So I hope that we continue to do that, and we have. I think we've done a good job of sort of holding true to this with every new big developer release we have. Like we lower prices somewhere across our stack. So hopefully that continues in the future as well.
Perfect. And thank you so much for continuously bringing down the price. I remember that when ChatGPT was launched, at that time the price was a bit high, and at that time we were building some AI integrations with Hashnode, and we were actually considering some open source models to be to basically reduce the cost. But I think within a couple of weeks, Chat GPT 3.5 Turbo was launched and the prices were slashed. So at that point, it didn't make any sense to host an open source model and do the inference yourself, because you will end up paying more to host the open source model, and you are probably better off just using OpenAI APIs.
Yeah, it's been an interesting artifact, and I think the open source world needs to do more work on figuring out. And I think this puts a lot of pressure on companies like Replicate, who are providing this inference infrastructure. And I think one of the nice parts about owning the inference infrastructure and the models is you can sort of make sure that they're sort of in symbiosis and working together. And I think for the Replicates of the world, like people are kind of building models and then just like throwing that at Replicate, and Replicates will like, hey, wait a second, like there's a bunch of things that we need to do at the modeling level actually to make these models more efficient from an inference perspective, and they don't really have the at least my perspective. I have no idea what influence they have, but they don't have the influence to actually like go and be like, hey, LLaMA, y'all, hey, Facebook team, like you need to make LLaMA more inference efficient in X, Y, and Z ways. Like they just don't have that ability, and our teams do because of the collaboration between inference and our research team.
And that's how you are able to bring the prices down continuously, which is very, very difficult for companies like Replicate working with open source models.
Yeah, indeed.
Cool. Okay, so coming to the last segment, I have a couple of career related questions. So what would be your advice to somebody who is looking to build an AI company? Would you say that they should spend some time actually understanding how machine learning and artificial intelligence works, or they are probably better off just using an off-the-shelf API like OpenAI?
Right now, today, it feels like the best thing to do is to just go and figure out how to build an incredible product. Like I think, at you should understand it definitely like the surface level of how this technology works, because I think like it has an impact on like how you actually build with it. I don't
Yeah.
think you need to be like a machine learning expert in order to use this technology. And in fact, I think the thing that's like freeing about this technology is you don't need to be a machine learning expert. So um, at the end of the day, like I don't think the fundamentals of how to build a great business have changed at all. I think you need to go out and you need to solve somebody's problem,
Yeah.
and then you need to go and execute on solving that problem faster than anyone else can possibly execute. And there's a bunch of like Sam actually put out a really great short blog post about 17 things that he wish he knew,
Yeah.
which is sort
Yeah.
of an homage to startups who are trying to build incredible things. And he's got a bunch of really great advice in there. And I'd
Yes.
suggest folks go and read it. But one of the things is that he mentioned that resonates with me, and I got to get it printed out as a poster and put it on my wall because it makes so much sense. It's just around like it's okay to be wrong as long as you're moving quickly. And I think so many people are wrong about things and they're not moving quick enough where they're able to like recover from being wrong. And I think like that's at the end of the day, like one of the most important things as a startup is staying nimble enough that you can like be wrong and evolve and continue to iterate and ship. And I think like for us at OpenAI, that's something that's like been one of the differentiators is like it's okay if we don't hit a home run on the first try. Like I think plugins is maybe a good example of this. Like I think, I don't think we were wrong with plugins, but it was really our first shot on goal of figuring out how to do this. And we were able to, maybe not as fast as people would have wanted, but we were able to iterate and take our second shot on goal, which was GPTs. And people seem to really, really like GPTs, and it's combines the best of both worlds in many ways. So I think the philosophy is true. And as long as you know how to build a great business and make it differentiated and have a moat and move quickly and build something that your customers love, the yeah, the technology is sort of like an enabling factor of this. Like, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is like building something that your customers actually need and love.
Absolutely, 100% agree. So I think the right framework is that start with a problem, and then AI just happens to be an enabler to solve that problem. Don't just insert AI just for the sake of it, right?
I, I would also suggest to folks to like think about deeply hard problems. And I think there's a lot of like everybody wants the shortcut in life. Everybody wants to solve like the easier problem. Like I think that's fair. Like I fall into this trap myself. But at the end of the day, like the problems that have the highest upside to solving are not like the surface level, easy to solve problems. Like go if you go and tackle like the deep, very challenging, society level problems, like those are the ones that are going to have the highest upside. And like, of course, it's going to be harder at solving it, but um, I think a lot of the like easy problems, and you've actually, and this is part of the sentiment around like OpenAI is killing my startup, et cetera, is there's a lot of problems that are very clear and evident today, but it's like very much so on like the immediate roadmap for whether or not it's OpenAI who builds something that solves that problem, or just like the models generally evolve to solve that problem. Like it's clear that problem is going to be solved by AI in the next months or years or whatever it is. And I think there's a whole host of those problems. And again, folks naturally want to have something where they can like actually have a solution in the short term. And I think that's why people build in that space. And I think there's this whole host of other really difficult, like end to end problems. Like I think medical space with AI is a great example of this. Like I think that's going to be a very open problem for many, many years to come. So you want something that's not going to be immediately disrupted by some new model capability. Like the legal space, the medical space, like all these areas were like very deep and complicated problems, and you need to really build full end-to-end systems. Like those are great areas to go and play.
I love it. I like it. And what would be the best way for somebody who wants to start building with OpenAI and be involved more with your community? What would be the best way for them to get started?
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, we have a bunch of like developer quick start guides and stuff like that. I think my suggestion to folks would be one, I would start with ChatGPT actually. Like if you're someone who's just getting into the space, go and play with ChatGPT, start to get a sense of like what are the problem spaces where this would be useful. And then I would take a step back and like figure out some actually like cool and interesting way of applying this technology. I think there's so many like, the world doesn't need another chatbot example. It really needs like your unique creativity of solving some like different problem in a different way, and like share that example with the world. Like I think there's going to be so much because of like just how long it takes sometimes for like this technology to get out into everybody's hands, and for like new people to come up with new ideas. I think 2024 is actually going to be the year where we see like a ton of different new paradigms of how to use this technology. I think historically it's like just been chat. So if you're someone who's seen like the chat UX and been like, I'm not super compelled by that, I think 2024 is going to be a great year to like see some of these alternative approaches come to light. So I would give it a second chance if you haven't been compelled by the chat use case as well this year.
Amazing. I think that's a great advice, and I'm so excited for 2024 to see so many amazing apps getting built.
Same, 100%. It's gonna be. I think it's going to be a crazy year. I really do think so. And it's also going to be the best year in human history to be a developer, to be somebody building a company. Like there's just going to be so many new capabilities that come online. And in some sense, I'm envious of a lot of developers and people building companies, because like you just have this most powerful technology and you can move super quickly to go and solve people's problems. And yeah, it's fun to support developers doing that. But yeah, I'm envious that I'm not able to build some of the things that folks are able to build themselves.
All right. So, and I think it's important for people to know that even though market is bad right now, but I think I just said it's going to be the best year, 2024.
I think it's a great market for AI companies. Like I think if you're building something with AI and you have like an AI first product, like there's never been, at least from like investors and product builders that I'm talking to, like there's never been a better time. Like I think like maybe there's some broad economic tailwinds that are happening, but I think I don't think it's affecting a lot of the innovation that's happening in the AI space today.
Amazing. I like it. So just before we wrap up, just one last question for you. So as someone who is seeing this whole AI tech evolve so closely, what are your some of the predictions for next 5, 10, or 20 years? What do you think is going to happen?
I think the agent's use case is really going to become well done. I think you're going to be able to, have your agent actually go and take actions on your behalf and have it happen reliably. I think a lot of that is going to come back to personalization. If you go and work with an executive assistant, as an example, part of the initial process of working with an executive assistant is that person asks you a bunch of stuff about your life. They ask you a bunch of stuff about how you prefer to do things. And there's this iteration cycle at the beginning. And I think oftentimes in today's AI agentic products, that initial cycle is kind of missing. It's also a bunch of work. Oftentimes for the outcome to not actually be that useful. So people do the work and then they're wait a sec, this isn't actually that helpful. Why would I I don't know, I don't really need this thing. So I think those use cases are going to get a lot better. The AI systems are going to, if you give them context, they're going to understand that context and be able to actually incorporate it to solve the problems better. So I'm really excited for that future of AI systems being able to do a bunch of stuff for me. And I think there's a lot of open research, safety, humanity questions that need to be solved around this, because I don't think the world is not equipped today. The way the internet was built, it was built for humans. It's not built for 25 billion or 100 billion AI agents going out and doing work on people's behalf. It's going to break a lot of the systems that we rely on if that happens. So I think, people are going to have to come together and figure out what the solution is to a lot of these things. And again, I think in many ways it's a good problem to have, because there's lots of interesting problems that need to be solved. I think there's lots of opportunities for people to engage in this discussion. We just released this new AI agents grant program. So if you're somebody who's working on this problem of how AI agents are going to interact with society and the world, we have funding available to help people who are doing that research. So I think there's never been a better time for people who are interested in solving this problem and contributing to the solution for how these things are going to impact our society.
Perfect. So I think agents is the future, right? That's the ultimate benefit of all the advancements that's happening right now.
Yeah, I think 100%. It's going to be. I get excited because there's so many things that I'm it would be really nice to just have someone sort of a co-pilot in real life solving a lot of the problems that I have. And just it's things I don't want to do. I want to go and get global entry so that when I fly back into the US, I don't have to worry about getting waiting on all the lines. And it's just a huge pain to set up the appointment to do global entry. I'm this is perfect. If I had an AI agent that would help me do this, I would love that. Go and take care of this annoying problem for me. I don't want to do the work of figuring that out. And there's so many things like that I think most of today's AI products are just very, you have to direct them to go and do a bunch of stuff. And I'm excited for that not to be the case, where the models and the agents kind of just do stuff and then I can approve their actions. And then over time, they just get good enough at it that they're just taking actions on my behalf, because that's what they know that I would have wanted them to do in many cases.
Yeah, like we discussed in the beginning, that humans will be free to solve bigger problems and bigger challenges. They don't have to focus on mundane or boring stuff. And that's the part I'm so excited about.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of boring stuff in life, so it'll be nice to not have to deal with that.
Right. I think this concludes our podcast episode. Thanks for joining the Commit podcast, Logan. Really appreciate you spending time with us.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for having me on. And I think the work that y'all are doing, enabling the developer ecosystem, is so important. So I'm, as a developer, deeply appreciative. Appreciate you having me on. And this was a ton of fun.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.